Welcome to the Habitat Conservation Fund Rare, Endangered, Threatened, or Fully Protected Species Habitat tutorial video. The intent of this category is to acquire property necessary to protect any rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected animal and/or plant. Let's begin reviewing the Rare, Endangered, Threatened, or Fully Protected Species Habitat Application Guide. Let's view the table of contents on page 3. Please note that all words and terms in caps are defined in the back of this application guide beginning on page 36. Now let's go to page 4. Here we are viewing the Habitat Conservation Fund, referred to as HCF, category chart, which identifies each of the 7 project categories, including eligible funding types, cost types, species impact, and project examples. The rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected species habitat category data is in the top middle column. It's being circled right now. Examples of eligible projects in this category include purchase of land, specifically to support and protect any rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected animal and/or plant. Since we've already reviewed the overall intent of this program at the beginning of this video, let's move to page 6 to review the program overview. The annual allocation. The HCF program allocates approximately $2 million per year to the California Department of Parks and Recreation. Please refer to the HCF webpage for the current amount available for this current application cycle. The application filing deadline. Please disregard the information about delivering or sending applications to OGALs. All applications must be submitted online. Visit the HCF webpage for application filing deadline information, as well as the link to submit the online application. Submit the application online before 5 p.m. Any application submitted to our online portal after 5 p.m. will not be accepted. The grant performance period for each project is 5 years, starting on July 1st of the fiscal year following the application due date, based on final enactment of the state budget. Please refer to the HCF webpage for the grant performance period dates. For the minimum and maximum grant request amounts, we will talk about that now. Although the current guide notes grant requests typically should not exceed $200,000, grant requests of $1 million to $2 million are encouraged for this round. However, there is no set minimum grant amount. Please request the amount needed up to $2 million to complete the project. Projects in all categories compete for the funding available. There is no designated amount set aside for a particular category. Required match. HCF does require match funds. Match requirement will be reviewed later in greater detail. However, please be aware of 2 key points. Number 1, there is a required non-state dollar-for-dollar match, and number 2, the match must be spent on eligible costs under the program.
Next, let's move to page 7 to view eligible applicants. Eligible applicants include cities, counties, or districts. See the definition of districts on page 36 of the application guide to ensure that your district is an eligible applicant. Please note that nonprofit organizations and state and federal agencies are not eligible applicants for the HCF program. Eligible projects. Please refer to the Habitat Conservation Fund category chart we reviewed earlier in order to view examples of eligible project types. Ineligible projects. In the middle of page 7, there is a list of ineligible projects. such as projects arising from a mitigation ruling affecting another location, are not eligible. Please review the specific list of ineligible projects to ensure that your proposal will be eligible. Now let's move to page 9 to review the application process. There is no limit to the number of applications an applicant can submit. Each project site must have its own application. An application cannot include more than one category. At a minimum, the project selection criteria must be submitted by the application deadline. No revisions to the project criteria will be accepted after this date. For the remainder of the application checklist documents, such as topographic maps or CEQA, we can work with you after the application deadline to complete. Now we'll proceed to page 10 to review the application packet checklist. Only submit items listed in the application packet checklist. Do not submit additional items such as letters of support. We understand the work that it takes to get these letters of support. Instead, focus on planning your project. All projects are reviewed based on the merits of the project using the project selection criteria only. Next, let's move to page 12 to review the application form. A fillable version is located on the HCF website. Complete all applicable fields on this form, including the approximate number of acres of the project site. Have this form signed by the applicant's authorized representative.
Let's proceed to page 14 to view the authorizing resolution form. Resolutions indicate your governing body supports the project and designates an authorized representative position who will sign forms in the application package. Please use language provided in the template. Please note number 5. The resolution requires a designated position, for example, a manager, director, etc., not a person's name. This position will also be responsible for signing payment requests if awarded. Therefore, if a specific person is identified and that person moves to a new position, additional paperwork will be required to designate a new authorized representative. This is why designating a position title rather than a person is important. The authorizing resolution is a common example of a checklist item that may need extra time to complete, and that is acceptable. Include a placeholder and a time frame of when the resolution will be adopted. Now, let's turn to page 15 to view the instructions for the grant scope cost estimate form and the match requirement. This form will be used to establish the expected grant deliverables. All the recreation features and major support amenities listed on this form must be completed and open to the public before final grant payment is approved. This is what our office, auditors, and the public will expect to see upon final grant payment. Let's move to the middle of this page to view directions for establishing the grant scope. This category allows for acquisition projects. Therefore, use the following phrase, acquire approximately X amount of acres that will be acquired. Next, let's review the information at the bottom of page 15 within the box. Costs such as appraisals, escrow closing costs, title reports, etc., are eligible and can be included on the grant scope cost estimate form. If the cost is less than $30,000, applicants can fold in the cost of this minor support cost into the land price. However, if costs are over $30,000, they must be listed on their own separate line as a standalone line item. Don't list future phases beyond what will be completed with the grant, plus match requirement.
Next, we'll move to the bottom of page 16 to review the match instructions. As previously mentioned, this program requires a dollar per dollar match. Match must be committed at the time of application. Future fundraising is not considered match. Next, on page 17 are the eligible match sources. Eligible match sources include local funds, local general funds, and local bond funds, private funds, donated materials and services, value of donated land for acquisition projects only, and federal funds. Other state funds are ineligible match sources. Moving further down page 17 are the rules regarding match. Match can only be spent on eligible costs, as the same rules apply to both grant request plus match. At the bottom of this page, there is an example on how to calculate the match amount of your project. Moving on to page 18, let's review the actual grant scope cost estimate form. Please use the applicable phrase as previously discussed, such as acquire, to write your scope on this form and the associated costs. Remember, do not list contingency cost as a separate line item. Indicate the HCF grant and required match costs, which will equal the estimated total project cost. The total project cost listed here on the grant scope cost estimate form must be consistent with the estimated total project cost listed on the application form. All figures need to be rounded to the nearest whole dollar. Below the chart is where you'll indicate the match sources, amounts, and the date committed.
Let's go to page 34 to view the eligible cost chart. The eligible costs for this category are listed on page 34. We encourage you to review these charts while developing your project proposal. Keep in mind the grant performance period for each project is 5 years. Costs are not eligible outside of these dates. The target date is to complete the project and submit final documents to our office by the last working date of March prior to the end of the grant performance period. Traveling down to page 35, we are now seeing the ineligible cost chart. Please review this list and remember that these ineligible costs cannot be charged to the grant, including indirect costs, grant writing, and costs incurred prior to the start of the grant performance period, and of course, costs associated to development, as this is an acquisition-only program. Now we'll proceed to page 20 to view the CEQA compliance certification form. CEQA instructions are located on page 19 and outlines the 2 required items. First is this form on this page, page 20, which is the CEQA compliance certification form. Second is either a notice of exemption or notice of determination filed with and stamped by the county clerk. Please ensure that the project description on the notice of exemption or notice of determination covers the acquisition of the parcel numbers described in the grant scope. No further CEQA analysis should be needed if the grant is awarded. If CEQA is not completed by the application deadline, then it's encouraged to complete and submit CEQA within 60 days after the application deadline.
Let's move to page 21. The project completion schedule. Please provide a project completion schedule that includes the proposed project's key milestones. Next is the topographic map. Please provide a topographic map that indicates the proposed project parcel's locations. Please depict the project in relation to the wildlife corridors or wildlife resources such as vegetated areas, creeks, and other features including archaeological sites, existing roads, and trails. We provided a link to the USGS topographic maps on the HCF website under additional application resources. Next, we have the project location map. Please provide a map with city or county, showing highways and street access to the project site, and with enough detail to allow a person unfamiliar with the area to locate the project. Next, we have the acquisition schedule. The instructions are located on page 21. However, we are going to review the actual acquisition schedule form on page 22. Please fill out this acquisition schedule form outlining the acreage and parcel numbers to be acquired, estimated acquisition date, and estimated value of each parcel to be acquired. Further instruction is below this chart with what information to include. Now let's proceed to page 23 to discuss the final checklist items. We have a county assessor's parcel map and willing seller letter. Please provide a county assessor's parcel map showing the parcels to be acquired through fee simple or a permanent easement. The parcel numbers reflected on the map must match those listed on the acquisition schedule. Please also include a willing seller letter from the landowner. This letter does not need to include legally binding language. A simple statement showing that the seller is willing to sell should the grant be awarded is acceptable. If the project is to acquire a permanent easement, please submit a copy of the proposed easement language for our review. Permanent easement agreements must guarantee the authority to use the property for the purpose specified in the application.
Let's move on to the project summary. Provide a one-page summary that describes the proposed project. The summary will not be scored. The project proposal. This includes all responses to the project selection criteria questions that we'll review in detail shortly. Staying on this page, let's move down to lease or agreements. Please provide a list of all leases, agreements, etc. affecting project lands or the operation and maintenance, excluding those relevant to land tenure, if applicable. Required regulatory permits. Please provide a list of existing and additional required permits, the status of each, and indicate when permit approval is expected. Some examples include Fish and Game permits and/or Army Corps of Engineers and/or State Lands Commission. Next is Land Management Plan for project lands previously acquired with HCF funds. If proposing a project on land that was previously acquired with HCF funds, describe the management plan that should include efforts to reasonably reduce possible conflict with neighboring land use and landowner. Next is photos of project site. Upload photos of the project site sufficient to show the area or areas to be acquired with a caption to describe and identify each photo.
Now let's proceed to project selection criteria on page 24. There is a total of 100 possible points. Everyone starts with 0 and points can only be gained. At the bottom of this page, you'll see the overview of criteria and the associated point values. Each criteria is followed by a descriptive rubric identifying the range of points to be gained. Let's begin with criteria 1 on page 25. Criteria 1 is threat. The applicant will describe any existing or potential harm or danger to the project site, an overall consequence if the proposed acquisition project cannot occur. Maximum points will be awarded to projects where a significant threat to the project site and/or targeted species exists. 10 to 16 points will be awarded to where there is moderate threat, and 5 to 1 points where there is a minimum threat. Next, let's go to criteria 2 on page 26. This is for site access. Per this program's legislation, the public should have access to the project site except when access may interfere with habitat protection. Applicants will describe the plans for public access after the acquisition by providing details on items A through E. A, reasonable entrance fees, parking fees, membership fees, activity fees, or no fees. B, on-site or close-by parking. C, easily available public transportation, bike lanes or trails. D, flexible hours, hours that accommodate target audiences. And E, solutions to any physical, financial, and/or cultural barriers and obstacles to the project site. Viewing the rubric below, you'll see that if the project site is accessible via all 5 items, then 10 points will be awarded. Let's move to criteria 3 on page 27. This is for stakeholders. Here, the applicant will describe the efforts to involve interested parties within the last 2 years, such as community-based stakeholders, nonprofit partners, or other public agency partners in the planning and/or implementation. And the response include the A, methods used to notify interested parties of the input opportunity. B, methods used to obtain interested parties' ideas. C, how the interested parties' ideas were incorporated in project design and/or implementation. The maximum number of points will be awarded to those applicants who make a concerted effort to involve a broad representation of interested parties in the process.
Criteria number 4 on page 28 is applicant capacity. In this criteria, applicants will respond to their knowledge and/or experience of the process to A, identify the appropriate and available property, B, negotiate terms of sale with the landowner, and C, secure the appropriate agency or agent to facilitate escrow transactions. OGALS will also review its own records and consider the applicant's performance history with OGALS as part of the project selection process. This includes reviewing the applicant's ability to complete previous grant-funded projects on time, timely submission of project status reports and payment requests, and to adequately operate and maintain previous grant-funded sites. As you can see in the rubric at the bottom of this page, applicants that address items A through C will be awarded maximum points. Criteria number 5 on page 29 is species presence. Here, applicants will describe the presence and variety of species that currently exist on the site. Applicants will visit the HCF webpage and click at the Additional Application Resources to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife website. Applicants will respond to this criteria by providing a description of the species that occur at the site, which are identified by the Department of Fish and Wildlife as species of great conservation need on the most up-to-date list, and B, a hard copy of the web link page that identifies those species. The maximum number of points will be awarded to projects which focus on the rarest of the most endangered species.
Next, let's move to criteria 6 on page 30. This is for habitat corridors. This criteria addresses the need to describe how the project will protect or establish a habitat corridor linking 2 or more rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected species habitat areas. A maximum of 10 points will be awarded for project sites that link at least 2 isolated or separated targeted species or habitats. Let's move on to criteria number 7 on page 31. This is for environmental elements. This criteria addresses the specific environmental elements present at the project site that are known to be important to the maintenance of endangered or threatened species population levels. Optimal environmental elements for those categories are A, seasonal and transition ranges, B, unique areas and habitat types such as spawning areas, and C, water resources and/or riparian areas. The maximum of 10 points will be awarded to projects encompassing all three of the environmental elements at the project site. Let's move to criteria 8 on page 32. This is for adjacent land uses. In this criteria, applicants will describe how the surrounding adjacent lands are used currently. Positive adjacent land uses could include the following. A, potential for conservation easement, B, minimal public safety concerns, and C, public wildlife areas. For example, is the adjacent land an existing wildlife refuge, national forest, or a designated park area? Neutral land uses will neither positively or negatively impact the project site. Negative land uses could include the following. A, potential for increased requests for depredation permits. B, potential for public safety concerns. And C, adjacent land uses that would harm the project site, such as proximity of light industrial activity, livestock overuse, etc. The maximum of 10 points will be awarded to projects where the surrounding land uses have at least one positive impact on the project site.
Criteria number 9 on page 33 is conservation plan. A project that satisfies a high priority need and is discussed in detail in one or more adopted plan, such as a natural community conservation plan or habitat conservation plan, riparian bird conservation plan, watershed plan, Bay Delta ecosystem restoration program plan, etc., will receive the maximum 5 points. Since we've already reviewed the eligible and ineligible costs on pages 34 through 35, we will move to the program definitions beginning on page 36. During our review of the table of contents, the list of program definitions was mentioned. Remember that all words and terms in caps are defined here. Please use this list to familiarize yourself with this program's definitions. This concludes the rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected species habitat tutorial video. Thank you for listening.